I have been pleased and thrilled to watch One America grow from 13 years ago, and it's a very confident organization that can celebrate its 13th anniversary without being superstitious. When I was at the Open Society Foundations, and we were pleased to support Pramila and the growth of hate-free Washington when it first started in the very dark days after 9/11. I'm honored and grateful to be invited to speak to you tonight because I believe that One America, both the work that it does week in and week out, and also the stunning human manifestation of it that is represented in this room, is a shining template for what a movement for social justice must look like and what we need to do to build an enduring progressive future in this country. Now, why do I believe that? In the few minutes I have to celebrate with you tonight, let me tell you why. First, it's because you understand that race is at the center of the American story and that whatever else immigration may be, a good government issue, an economic issue, a human rights issue, it has to be understood and dealt with as a race issue. There's no other way to understand the fierce resistance, the anxiety and hatred that our opponents bring to the question of how we as a country treat immigrants, except to see it as one more chapter in a sordid saga that started with a Constitution that embraced 3/5 personhood for slaves, and to this day suspends black students, even 4-year-olds, from school at a rate 3 times that of white kids. Next, you understand that no one approach will get us the social and economic justice that we strive for. Community organizing, policy analysis, civic engagement, strategic communications, coalition building, cultural work, all of these are needed and must be connected if we're to win immigration reform, a living wage, schools that work for all, housing and transportation systems that meet the needs of working families. And you also understand that no one constituency can bring about the change we need. Immigrants, young people, women, LGBT people, white working class men, and even some rich people like the ones I represent and try to organize, all are needed, working together in all their overlapping and intersectional glory. You also understand that among these constituencies, labor, the sweat, dollars, and voices of working men and women, is a vital driver of progressive reform and economic justice. What dignity and security working Americans have received over the last century is largely due to the labor movement, to what can be accomplished with, to use an old-fashioned word much in need of revival, solidarity. And you understand that there is no good path to the restoration of economic justice and progressive government that does not have a revitalized labor movement at its core. Next, you understand that states and cities are the most powerful engines of progressive reform. Just as the New Deal was foreshadowed in New York State when FDR was governor, so too is the next great progressive era, starting in places like Washington. The state, that is, not our polarized and increasingly dysfunctional national capital. I've followed with admiration and envy what you've been able to achieve in the last year alone. A $15 minimum wage in SeaTac, a new low-income transit fare for all King County residents with incomes at 200% of the poverty level. Increased funding for the state-supported New Americans program and a powerful naturalization and new citizenship program that One America runs. A Seattle-wide pilot program to protect the livelihoods of immigrant and refugee taxi drivers. New limits on collaboration between King County law enforcement and ICE. More state investment in paraeducators to build a more diverse educational workforce, and a new state seal of biliteracy to support English language learners. All around the country, communities are grappling with how to bring economic justice to every person and every family in what used to be called the American dream. And here you're making tangible progress. You've accomplished all this because you understand that while elections are important, it's what happens after elections that is critical. You understand the need not only to put allies into office, but to hold them accountable once they're there, that democracy does not run on a 2-year cycle or a 4-year cycle, but a 24/7 cycle. And I'm sure that many political leaders in this room, whose presence and support we are most grateful for, will agree that they have been raised to be their best selves as leaders by the accountability you demand of them. And what of the future? For progressives in the country as a whole, I believe it must lie in the kind of approach you have demonstrated here. Leading with economic justice, understanding the demographic revolution and mobilizing it to demand change, steering resources to critical state and local battles, and protecting and expanding the infrastructure of democracy itself. I'll be watching closely as you mobilize popular support to fight public transportation cuts, campaign to bring the $15 minimum wage to Seattle, establish universal preschool for all 3- and 4-year-olds in the city, and lend your considerable weight and momentum to compel Congress to finally pass comprehensive immigration reform. The Democracy Alliance and I will be your allies in these battles, and not just allies, but vigorous advocates. And it's been a very rough week for social justice in Washington, D.C. The McCutcheon ruling of the U.S. Supreme Court further tightened the stranglehold of the rich on our government. The Paul Ryan budget that was released with its cruel cuts to food stamps and other elements of the social safety net. The good news, of course, was that 7.1 million people have enrolled for Obamacare. But despite that, we live in a country where one political party seems to have as its chief mission unrelenting hostility to the notion that Americans ought to have health care. So it hasn't been such a good week. But when I go back to the other Washington next week, I'll tell my colleagues with great enthusiasm that I have seen our progressive future, and it looks just like what you're doing here in Washington State. Thanks for allowing me to share in your story.